Giant puppets are the best thing that have happened in decades. My friend Richard gave me these words exactly 20 years ago this week. He offered them to me after I returned to San Francisco, where I was living at the time, from Seattle. I'd been in the Emerald City participating in the protests against the World Trade Organization, or WTO. Richard was feeling very hopeful about the future of the country's democratic social movements. Hope might be described as the midpoint between optimism and pessimism. The writer James Cabell drew a distinction between optimism and pessimism. He wrote, "The optimist proclaims that we live in the best of all possible worlds, and the pessimist fears that this is true." Optimists take a passive position. They think that the good and the right will win out in the end. Pessimists think that the world cannot be different than what it is. The hopeful person imagines that the world can be different, but believes that transforming it requires action. The hopeful person acts not believing in the certainty of success, but rather holding on to the possibility of it. As Reverend Scott told you last week, when we hope, we envision what is possible, and then we get up and make those hopes happen. Richard had hope because the WTO protests had turned the world upside down. For a few short hours, the regular world order in which corporate forces and their political proxies set the global agenda had vanished, had been replaced by a brilliant cacophony of political theater. At least 40,000 people from throughout the world had come together and shut down Seattle. WTO negotiations had collapsed in the aftermath. Labor unions, students, environmentalists, clergy, indigenous activists, and just ordinary folk had united to score a victory against the forces of corporate globalization. Giant puppets had played a key role in all of this unfolding. Built from papier-mâché, wood, and chicken wire, they created rallying points and turned the protests into a carnival. There was Mother Earth, 10 feet high, demanding that the world's political leaders put people and the environment, not money and profits, first. There was a sea of green turtle costumes, serving to remind everyone of the many animals who faced extinction, threatened by unbridled corporate activity. And there was a caricature of a corporate raider marching around, gobbling people up and creating forests or dollar bills from forests. In the streets of Seattle, protesters and giant puppets gathered to occupy and block each of the major intersections that led in and out of the complex of hotels and convention centers where the trade negotiators were meeting. I was one of them. I was both witness to the imaginative acts of civil disobedience and subjected to the militarized brutality of the Seattle police. Each group occupying a street corner was different. There were the famous Teamsters and Turtles, a coalition of truck drivers and environmental activists who had been in conflict for years. They had come together to protest the global trade regime that threatened the things that each of them cared about: good-paying union jobs and clean water, air, and protection for the world's most vulnerable species. There was the infamous Black Bloc, a young group of anarchists from the Pacific Northwest who covered their faces and dressed in black. When they were brutally attacked by the police, they fought back, throwing tear gas canisters back into the police lines. At the time, they drew widespread disdain from liberals and business union leaders, but they played a vital role that was not widely reported in protecting many but nonviolent protesters from beatings at the hands of riot police. My favorite group called themselves the Groucho Marxists. A collective of clowns from who knows where, they performed ridiculous routines at the intersections they occupied. They mimed and joked, alternating the words of Karl Marx with skits and words derived from the classic vaudeville and early film quartet of comedians, the Marx Brothers. Statements such as, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs, were paired with absurdities like, who you gonna believe, me or your own eyes? And time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. One clown chased another up a lamppost with a squeaky horn, and the police were perplexed as to how to respond to it all. It was precisely such acts of creative theater and unity that made the protests in Seattle successful and inspiring. They were acts of collective hope. People came together and imagined that the world could be different. And then they worked together to creatively try to bring that different world about. Another world is possible was one of their slogans. Another world is possible is a hopeful statement. It suggests that things need not be as they are. And it reminds us that we humans have agency to create the world we live in. That is the ultimate definition of hope, that we can act and we can choose. Hope is not the promise that we will succeed. Instead, hope is the stories we tell each other about the possibilities we see in the world and for our lives. Religions are largely organized around hope. Religion is sometimes defined as that which binds us together. Such a definition looking to the root of the word in Latin, religio. Ligio meaning to bind or connect, and the prefix re signifying again, to connect again. Religion might be thought of that which connects and then reconnects us, that which binds us together. The stories of hope that we tell that bring us together again and again. Each religion offers a particular story about hope. Orthodox Christians, as we are reminded at this Christmas time, are bound together by the hope that through their relationship with Jesus, they will find peace and unity with God after they die. Orthodox Muslims are bound together by a belief that those who follow the teachings of the Quran will likewise be united with God. Most Buddhists are bound together by the hope that they will ultimately achieve enlightenment through meditation. Practitioners of many of the Earth's indigenous traditions are bound together by hope that they can live in harmony with the earth. Humanists are bound together by the hope that human beings are the authors of their own destiny. And we Unitarian Universalists are bound together by our 7 principles, expressions of our collective hope for the human community. What do you hope for? What stories would you tell about the possibilities for our human world? What do you see as the possibilities for your own life? For the possibilities of our city of Houston, or for our church, or for the other communities of which you are a part? In a free society, we have some room to choose our own stories. We have some room to choose what we will hope for. We have freedom of religion. We can choose to be Christian or Buddhist or humanist or Unitarian Universalist. And we must choose carefully. The most important choices we make in our lives are often about which stories we will participate in. When we choose a career or take a job, we are choosing to be part of a particular story about our relationship to work. When we choose a romantic partner or decide to have a family or to buy a house or to move to a new city or to attend to a school, we are all choosing to be part of different stories. The story of married life, the story of parenthood, the story of home ownership, or the story of student life. Each of these choices is a different expression of hope. Each carries with it a different sense of possibility. Recognizing the power of our choices means cultivating what the Buddhist philosopher and ecologist Joanna Macy calls active hope. Active hope comes from the recognition that we have the ability to choose. She reminds us any situation we face can resolve in a range of different ways, some much better, others much worse. When we practice active hope, we focus on the outcomes we would like to see in the world, and then we begin to work to bring them about. Active hope is not rooted in the assurance that our actions will be successful. Instead, it is based in a belief that there is a possibility that our actions may succeed. It comes from an understanding, to invoke Martin Luther King, that we may yet be able to make a way out of no way. These are difficult times. Each week, bringing the news seems to remind us that we ignore the grave crises of the hour at our own peril. The House of Representatives is drafting articles of impeachment, a signal that our democracy is in crisis. In Madrid, politicians from throughout the world gather for the United Nations Climate Summit. As year by year, carbon emissions rise, a signal that we humans face the existential crisis of climate change. This week, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Fred Hampton by the Chicago police has come. A member of the Black Panther Party, Hampton coined the phrase the Rainbow Coalition and sought to transform the world for the better. He expressed hope in his statement, "If you dare to struggle, you dare to win." And his death at the age of 21 should be a reminder that the white supremacy that is resurgent today has been present for a long time. Another event of the week has had me thinking about active hope. On Tuesday, a labor union I helped start in Cambridge, Massachusetts went on strike for the first time. 7 years ago, a handful of us met in a small room and shared with each other the hope, the possibility that our workplace could be different. We imagined we could have better benefits, better working conditions, and protection from harassment on the job. Today, more than 3,000 people are on strike and struggling to win exactly those things. Of the half dozen people who were present in that room when we started the union, only one of us still works at that work site. Oftentimes, the hopes that we have are not for ourselves, but for those who will come after us. And yet our active hope, our belief things could be different, slowly can lead to the development of an organization or a community or an idea that will make a difference for thousands of people. There's a song from the labor movement that suggests such hopes. The choir is going to sing it for us now. The song expresses a few truths about the kind of hope that is necessary for today. It's not a hope that hinges on individuals. It's a hope that is dependent upon people acting together. It's a hope that does not offer immediate results. Instead, it's a hope that builds step by step, each drop, each stone making a contribution. These contributions are often anonymous. The names of individual actors are forgotten, but together they do gradually create a new story, a new set of possibilities. Another world is possible. The protests in Seattle were about what set of possibilities we as a human species would choose. The story that the World Trade Center offers, the hope that articulates, is one developed by believers in neoliberal capitalism. Their story might be succinctly described as a belief that we are what we consume. They believe it is possible to put a monetary value on almost all forms of human interaction, all varieties of life on the planet, and all of the Earth's natural resources. The corporate leadership of the WTO argues for what they call free trade. They want to remove all of the barriers that might prevent money from traveling across international borders. These might be environmental legislation, labor unions, or tariffs on particular goods. The WTO accomplishes its goals by forcing national governments to give up a portion of their sovereignty, their ability to make decisions in exchange for access to global markets. It is countries that want to trade with other countries are told that in order to do so, they must not pass legislation that will restrict the flow of money in or out of their borders. It is for this reason that the rules of the WTO suggest that workers in one country cannot set expectations for how labor will be performed in another. It's why we have, in this country, goods imported from countries like China, where workers have no regular bathroom breaks, little access to protective gear, or 40-hour work weeks, as we might expect here in the United States. This set of stories is based on the idea that for people in this country, our hopes, our possibilities are most closely linked to what we buy. This is the dominant story in our society, a story that becomes all the more evident as we approach Christmas. What do you hope for Christmas? A pair of boots or some nice kitchenware? Or peace upon earth, goodwill to all? Those who run the WTO hope that we will thrive as individuals in a capitalist system. They believe that each person is an individual actor in the global marketplace, selling their labor and buying goods. Society will flourish when all are truly free to buy and sell as we like. Those of us who were on the streets of Seattle wanted a society that was organized not around buying and selling, but around a different set of choices. They wanted a society where hope was found in the collective, not in the individual. Teamsters and turtles together. Indigenous activists and clergy marching as one. This is the ultimate choice we face. Will you choose to tell a story that tells us to hope as individuals, or you choose to tell a story that tells us to hope as a collective? Many of us are affluent enough that we can make such a choice and imagine that whatever the climate crisis or the crises throughout the globe, we can escape its consequences. We imagine we can live in high-rises high above the flooding water, or retreat to air conditioning as the world cooks, and perhaps such possibilities are open for some of us. But it is more likely that we are all bound together, and that in these hours hope is a collective possibility. It's likely that none of us, or at least none of our children and grandchildren, will be able to escape the consequences of the climate crisis. And it is only by nurturing active hope together, by recognizing that it is possible that the world can be different, that we can have any chance of changing things for the better for future generations. The movement that was the protests against the WTO ultimately fizzled. It peaked in 2001 and then was washed away by the mad rush to war that followed the 9/11 terror attacks. Last spring, I found myself in San Francisco with one of my friends who had been on the streets with me 20 years ago, and she was depressed. She told me that she felt that everything we had struggled against had come to pass. The global trade order had become solidified. People appeared to be getting more and more meaning from individual consumption and less from collective or communal possibilities. The political situation at home and abroad was worse. The climate crisis was being ignored. The labor movement was weaker than it had been in decades. I shared my friend's sadness. And yet, the last few months have seemed to be infused with possibility again. The global climate strikes have been the largest actions for environmental justice in history. 2019 has been the greatest year for labor militancy in more than 30 years. Perhaps we sit at the edge of some new possibilities. Joanna Macy tells us to hope for the great turning, the global awakening to the disease of our planet, our love of life, and the revolution that can heal our world. Maybe by a practice of active hope, we can bring it about. But I close now not with my own words or with Macy's, but with those of Joy Harjo. The Indigenous poet reminds us that there have been those who have struggled to keep hope alive generation after generation when it seemed like there was no way to make a way out of no way. That hope was always a hope for the collective, not for the individual. For you will hear in her poem not the first person, singular, but the first person, plural. Here again is the opening stanza of her poem. We kept on dancing last summer, though the dancing had become called subversive. We weren't alone at the end of this particular world, and we knew it wouldn't be the last world. The wars had broken out on all sides. Let us hear the hopes in these words and hope that a better world remains possible. I invite the congregation to say amen.